silent desert stretches endlessly under a moonlit sky. The wind carries the sound of distant camel bells, clashing swords and cries buried in the darkness. The camera slowly glides over the shifting dunes as if searching for something. Suddenly we see shadows, men locked in tribal battle, women mourning, children hiding behind broken tents. The scene fades to the towering walls of the Kaaba, surrounded by 360 idols made of stone, wood, and metal. Torches flicker, lighting up faces filled with fear, pride, and confusion. And then a deep voice asks, what kind of world was this before the arrival of the final prophet? A world where honor meant revenge, where daughters were buried alive, and where faith was lost in superstition. The screen grows darker. Why did humanity need guidance? What happens when truth disappears and falsehood becomes the norm? A final image appears, an Arabian night sky, completely black, until a single ray of light slowly breaks the darkness. This is the story of a world drowning in ignorance, moments before the dawn. Centuries ago, long before Islam illuminated hearts and lands, Arabia was a land isolated from the world, yet positioned at its very crossroads. A desert peninsula, harsh and unforgiving, but home to tribes whose pride was matched only by their loyalty. A place where survival demanded strength and unity, but where unity itself was fragile. This era is known as Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. Not because people lacked poetry, trade, or intelligence, but because they lacked guidance, justice, and spiritual truth. Makkah stood at the center, not as a religious sanctuary of monotheism, though it was built by Ibrahim and Ismail, but as a marketplace of idols. Every tribe had its own god, and every god stood powerless beside the sacred Kaaba. At the same time, the world beyond Arabia was no better. The Roman Empire was crumbling under corruption and oppression. The Persian Empire was drowning in class division, tyranny, and fire worship. Abyssinia held its faith, but lacked influence. Humanity everywhere was spiritually exhausted. It was a world waiting unknowingly for a message that would reshape history. This video will take you deep inside that world, the world before Islam, the world that desperately needed a prophet, the world where injustice grew unchecked, where tribes battled endlessly, and where faith had been replaced with superstition. To understand the rise of Islam, we must first understand the darkness that came before the light, because only then can we feel the full power of what was about to occur, a transformation unlike anything the world had ever seen. Now let us go back in time, into the deserts of Arabia, into the cities of trade and the valleys of conflict, and witness the world exactly as it was, just before the arrival of the final messenger. The Arabian Peninsula, before Islam, was a land shaped entirely by its geography, a place where the desert ruled the lives, minds, and destinies of its people. Endless stretches of sand, scorching heat, and scarce water created a society built on resilience. Those who lived here were not careless wanderers. They were survivors molded by the harshness of their environment. Every grain of sand carried a story, every oasis was a treasure, and every cloud in the sky was a sign of hope. Life in Arabia revolved around three major regions: the fertile lands of Yemen in the south, the rugged mountains of the Hijaz to the west, and the vast deserts of Najd in the center. Each region produced a different kind of people: traders, farmers, warriors, all bound to the land in their own ways. In Najd, tribes moved constantly in search of water, their lives tied to their herds of camels and goats. These Bedouins were proud, independent, and fiercely protective of their honor. The desert taught them to rely only on family and tribe. It taught them that survival itself was a daily battle. Meanwhile, in the Hijaz, the cities of Makkah and Taif became bustling trade centers. Caravans from Yemen, Iraq, and Syria passed through these cities, making Makkah a meeting point for cultures, languages, and beliefs. Yet, despite this connection to the world, the spiritual darkness remained. The mountains surrounding Makkah created natural protection, while its valleys became gathering points for tribes during trade seasons. Markets would come alive with poetry competitions, camel trading, and merchants selling spices, silk, and gold. Life here felt more advanced than the deep desert, but the people were still trapped under tribal superiority, superstition, and idol worship. In the agricultural lands of Yemen, life looked different. Rain-fed terraced fields, strong kingdoms like Saba and Himyar, and influence from both Persian and Abyssinian powers. But even these lands were part of a larger world struggling spiritually. Every tribe, every region, and every lifestyle carried its own strengths, but all shared one reality: the absence of divine guidance. Arabia, from its scorching deserts to its wealthy markets, was a land perfectly prepared for change. A land waiting for a message that would unify hearts and reshape civilizations. Arabian society before Islam was built on one foundation stronger than any law, any government, or any written code: the tribe. A man's tribe was his identity, his protection, and his pride. There was no king to obey, no court to seek justice from, no police to maintain order. The tribe was everything. Loyalty to one's clan was absolute, even if the clan was wrong. In this world, the highest virtue was honor, and the greatest shame was cowardice. Every individual carried not just his own reputation, but the reputation of his ancestors. A single insult could ignite decades of warfare, and a single act of bravery could elevate a family for generations. The concept of revenge defined the social structure. If a man from one tribe harmed someone from another, the cycle of retaliation began. It didn't matter how small the initial conflict was. It grew until blood was repaid with blood. The legendary Basis War, fought for 40 years over a minor dispute involving grazing rights, was only one example of how easily tribes plunged into violence. To the people of this era, vengeance was not cruelty. It was justice. A tribe that failed to avenge an insult lost respect in the eyes of others. Inside each tribe, leadership was respected but not absolute. Chiefs led by wisdom, generosity, and age. A tribal leader had to be strong enough to protect his people and kind enough to earn their trust. Hospitality became a sacred custom. A guest, even if he came from an enemy tribe, was treated with honor for as long as he stayed under someone's roof. But this generosity existed alongside deep divisions. Tribes looked down upon one another, considering themselves superior because of lineage or strength. Social classes existed sharply. The wealthy noble families held influence, while the poor slaves and vulnerable groups survived only under the protection of tribal patrons. Women had little power in most tribes, and justice depended entirely on who you belonged to. There was no universal fairness, only tribal convenience. This entire structure, powerful, proud, chaotic, kept Arabia alive but also trapped it in endless cycles of conflict. It was a society filled with strength, yet desperately lacking unity, justice, and a higher moral purpose. Religion in Arabia before Islam was a mosaic of confusion, fragmented beliefs, ancient rituals, and traditions that had drifted far from their original purpose. At the heart of Makkah stood the Kaaba, once a house of monotheism built by Ibrahim and Ismail, but now surrounded by 360 idols. Every tribe brought its own god, placing it proudly around the sanctuary. Some idols were carved from stone, others made from clay, and some even fashioned from dates, eaten by their worshippers in times of hunger. The greatest idol was Hubal, placed inside the Kaaba, believed to control fate through divination arrows. People would stand before it seeking answers about marriage, travel, trade, and even newborn children. Superstition had replaced spirituality. Arabs believed in jinn roaming the deserts, omens hidden in bird flight, and curses carried by the wind. If a traveler tripped, it was a bad sign. If a crow cried at night, disaster loomed. Instead of trusting one creator, they trusted symbols carved by their own hands. The sacred months, originally meant to preserve peace, were often manipulated for tribal benefit. The pilgrimage, Hajj, still existed, but it had lost its essence. People performed tawaf naked, claiming they shouldn't use clothes tainted by their sins. Sacrifices were made not for Allah but for the idols surrounding the Kaaba. Yet not everyone belonged to this world of confusion. In Yathrib lived Jewish tribes who followed remnants of the Torah. In Najran were Christians who held on to the teachings of Isa, though mixed with later beliefs. These communities preserved pieces of truth, but they too were divided and influenced by political interests. Amidst this religious chaos, a rare group walked a different path, the Hanifs. These were individuals who rejected idolatry entirely, seeking the pure monotheism of Ibrahim. Among them was Zayd ibn Amr, who would stand outside the Kaaba warning people, saying he would never worship idols that could not hear, see, or protect. This mix of idol worship, imported religions, and scattered seekers showed one thing clearly: Arabia was spiritually lost. People longed for meaning, but they did not know where to find it. The world had been prepared. Hearts were searching, minds were questioning, and the stage was ready for a message that would restore the forgotten truth of one God. The economic and cultural life of Arabia before Islam was a world of contrast. Harsh desert survival on one side and flourishing trade, poetry, and seasonal markets on the other. In a land with little agriculture, trade became the lifeline of entire tribes. Makkah, in particular, was the beating heart of Arabian commerce. protected by its sacred status and positioned between the trade routes of Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Abyssinia. Makkah became a meeting point of merchants, caravans, foreign travelers, and storytellers. Every year, caravans would embark on long journeys, one in winter toward Yemen and another in summer toward Syria, bringing back spices, silk, leather, precious oils, and grains. The Quraysh were respected across Arabia because they controlled these routes, ensuring security for traders in exchange for alliances and influence. The markets of Arabia were more than places of buying and selling. They were cultural stages. The most famous of these was the Epochs market, a seasonal gathering where tribes from every corner arrived. Here, poets recited verses with such power that entire tribes gained honor or humiliation through a single poem. Poetry was the pride of pre-Islamic Arabs. It was their newspaper, their record of history, their weapon, and their entertainment. A talented poet was more valued than a skilled warrior because words could spark wars or end them. Tribal heritage, love stories, battles, and heroic deeds were preserved in beautifully crafted lines passed down from memory to memory. Despite this rich culture, economic life carried deep inequalities. The wealthy merchants lived comfortably, while slaves, debtors, and the poor survived on the edges of society. Many people depended on patronage, seeking protection from powerful families to avoid exploitation. Gambling, interest-based loans, and unfair trade practices were common. The strong dominated the weak, and the absence of a moral code meant profit was often earned at the expense of justice. Yet, even with its flaws, this economic system played a crucial role in preparing Arabia for a universal message. Makkah's Strait connected it to different civilizations, exposing the people to new ideas and stories. The flow of travelers and cultures brought hints of forgotten truths, mirroring a world ready for transformation. In the middle of marketplaces filled with noise and negotiation, hearts silently longed for fairness, honesty, and a purpose greater than wealth. Moral life in Arabia before Islam was a landscape of extremes, acts of unmatched generosity standing side by side with practices of unimaginable cruelty. Honor and bravery were celebrated, but mercy was rare. The absence of divine guidance allowed traditions to become twisted over generations, until they shaped a society where the powerful thrived and the vulnerable suffered silently. One of the darkest practices was the burial of newborn daughters. Some tribes believed girls brought shame, others feared poverty, and some simply followed old customs without understanding. A father would carry his infant daughter to the desert, her tiny hands gripping his finger, unaware of what awaited her. The wind would blow softly, the sand shifting, and a life would be ended in silence. These moments reveal how deeply society needed a message that valued every soul, regardless of gender or status. Slavery was another painful reality. Captives of war, debtors, and the poor often found themselves bought and sold like objects. Some masters treated their slaves kindly, but many saw them as tools. A man's worth was measured not by character, but by lineage. A noble could commit injustice and still walk proudly, while a poor man's truth could be buried simply because he had no tribe to protect him. Justice depended entirely on power. Alcohol and gambling were woven into daily life. Men gathered at night around fires, drinking until they lost control, gambling away wealth, weapons, and even family members. These habits destroyed relationships, ignited fights, and deepened poverty. Tribal discrimination ran deep. Arabs looked down upon non-Arabs, wealthy families disrespected the poor, and certain clans were treated as inferior because of ancient rivalries. Yet inside all this darkness were sparks of goodness. Some people fed travelers for days, even if they had little. A stranger could walk into a tent and be welcomed with the best food available. Courage, loyalty, and hospitality were honorable traits that existed, but without moral balance, these virtues could not heal a society wounded by injustice. This moral imbalance, where kindness lived but cruelty dominated, created a world desperately in need of a guiding light. Arabia had strength, pride, and brilliance, but what it lacked was a system of justice, compassion, and spiritual truth. It was a world waiting for reform, waiting for mercy, waiting for a message that would redefine the value of every human life. The Arabian Peninsula, isolated yet at the crossroads of empires, was not the only land in turmoil. Beyond its deserts and valleys, the world itself was brimming with corruption, conflict, and spiritual decline. To the north, the Roman Empire, once a beacon of power and law, was crumbling under the weight of internal corruption, decadence, and endless political conspiracies. Soldiers marched, emperors fell, and the people of Rome grew weary, their faith hollow, their lives controlled by tyrants rather than truth. To the east, the Persian Empire was vast but fractured. consumed by class divisions, wars over succession, and fire worship that had long replaced the wisdom of the prophets. The poor were oppressed, the weak silenced, and the rulers lived in luxury, blind to the suffering of their people. Even further, the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia stood as a small, devout stronghold, but its influence reached only a limited circle. Its faith was preserved, but it lacked the reach to change the course of civilizations. Across lands near and far, humanity wandered spiritually, seeking guidance yet grasping only fragments of the truth. Philosophers debated, kings legislated, but no one could restore the moral compass that had been lost over generations. In the midst of this global darkness, Arabia's spiritual emptiness stood out sharply. Its people had no king, no empire, and no system of justice beyond the tribe. Yet paradoxically, the very isolation and hardship of Arabia had created hearts capable of deep longing. While the world at large struggled under systemic corruption, Arabia was a land of ready souls. Some, like the Hanifs, searched for one God. Travelers and traders had glimpses of other cultures and teachings. The people had courage, honor, and resilience, the tools necessary to embrace a universal message. The stage was set. The world had reached a tipping point. Humanity had endured centuries of trials and errors, waiting silently for guidance. It was in this environment, Arabia's deserts, its markets, its tribes, and the wider world beyond, that Allah chose to send the final messenger. Hearts were searching, minds questioning, and societies ready for transformation. The darkness, both local and global, had reached its peak, making the arrival of Islam not only necessary but inevitable. In this moment of anticipation, the world stood on the brink of light, poised for a change that would ripple through every desert, every city, and every heart. Among the many people wandering through the darkness of pre-Islamic Arabia, searching for truth yet bound by tradition, few stood out as beacons of monotheism. One such figure was Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, a man whose heart rejected the idols surrounding the Kaaba long before the arrival of the Prophet. Zayd was not born into ignorance like most of his contemporaries. He was born with a spirit restless for truth, a mind unwilling to accept empty rituals, and a soul that could sense the void in Arabia's spiritual landscape. Even as a young man, he observed the world around him with piercing clarity. He saw traders bowing to carved stones for luck, tribes waging wars over insults, and families burying daughters in the sand, all without question. These acts, he realized, were signs of a society spiritually blind, yet desperately seeking guidance. Unlike the majority of his peers, Zayd refused to follow the patterns of his tribe blindly. He rejected the idols completely, refusing to pray to any statue that could neither hear, see, nor benefit him. Many ridiculed him, labeling him strange or naive, yet he persisted. His courage was quiet but unwavering. He risked social exclusion, scorn, and sometimes even danger, simply because he could not betray his conscience. He would often walk around the Kaaba, not to worship the stones or idols, but to speak the truth as he understood it. He questioned his people, warning them of the futility of their practices, urging them to seek the way of Ibrahim, the way of pure monotheism. Zayd's search for truth led him far beyond Makkah. He traveled to distant lands seeking scholars and teachers who might reveal the path to God. In every journey, he maintained a consistent principle. He would worship only the one who created him, the one who deserved devotion. His life demonstrates that even in the heart of ignorance, one could find clarity and courage. Zayd ibn Amr's story is a bridge between the darkness of Jahiliyyah and the dawn of Islam. He was among the first to prepare hearts for the revelation that was about to come. The life of Zayd teaches several profound lessons. True faith requires courage, especially when the world around you resists truth. Spiritual integrity is more valuable than social approval or comfort. Even one person's devotion to God can become a guiding light for others. His example reminds us that the search for truth is not bound by time or circumstance. It is a personal journey that can influence generations. As we look at the deserts, the markets, and the tribes of Arabia, we can see the subtle impact of individuals like Zayd ibn Amr. Though the majority of Arabia remained lost in superstition, the existence of such seekers ensured that hearts were ready when the final messenger arrived. Without these early forerunners, the light of Islam might not have found its immediate resonance. Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail stands as a testament to the power of conviction, preparation, and unwavering faith in the midst of darkness, reminding us that even a single soul steadfast in truth can shape the course of history. The story of Arabia before Islam is not just a tale of deserts, tribes, and idols. It is a lesson for all of humanity, a mirror reflecting the consequences of spiritual neglect and the importance of guidance. In this world of extremes, we see both courage and cruelty, generosity and oppression, hope and despair. The lessons hidden in the lives of its people resonate even today, reminding us that a society without moral anchors is vulnerable to chaos, injustice, and spiritual decay. The first lesson is the value of guidance and divine truth. Without a universal moral compass, Arabia's tribes were trapped in cycles of violence and revenge. Honor, loyalty, and bravery were celebrated, but they existed alongside oppression, injustice, and the subjugation of the weak. The burial of daughters, the exploitation of the poor, and the idol worship all reveal how a society can flourish materially yet collapse morally. Guidance, as revealed in Islam, is not merely a set of rituals or laws. It is the light that transforms hearts and societies. Zayd ibn Amr and other seekers like him show that even in darkness the human spirit longs for truth. It is a reminder that seeking knowledge, justice, and faith is both a personal duty and a social necessity. The second lesson is the importance of courage and conviction. Zayd ibn Amr's life demonstrates that one person's unwavering commitment to truth can make a profound impact even when surrounded by ignorance. True courage is not measured in physical strength or worldly achievements, but in the steadfastness to uphold what is right despite ridicule, danger, or social pressure. This lesson is timeless. Moral and spiritual integrity must precede convenience, popularity, or fear of criticism. The third lesson is the value of preparation and readiness. Arabia's people, though trapped in Jahiliyyah, were inadvertently being prepared for the arrival of Islam. Their struggles, their longing for justice, and the small sparks of monotheism scattered across the land set the stage for a message that would transform not only Arabia but the entire world. It teaches us that even in times of hardship or moral decline, every effort toward truth, justice, or knowledge matters. Preparation is often invisible but crucial. It is the soil into which divine guidance can grow. Finally, we learn that light always follows darkness. Arabia's deserts were harsh, its markets full of greed, and its society marred by cruelty, but these were the conditions that allowed Islam to flourish. Just as the dawn breaks after the longest night, the arrival of the Prophet brought clarity, justice, and mercy. Darkness is temporary. It is a test and a stage for transformation. The past of Arabia reminds us that no matter how deep the ignorance or moral decay, divine guidance can restore balance, heal societies, and ignite hearts. In reflecting on these lessons, we understand that the story of pre-Islamic Arabia is not merely history. It is a blueprint for recognizing darkness, valuing guidance, embracing courage, preparing for change, and having hope. It reminds us that faith, integrity, and moral vigilance are the pillars upon which civilizations rise and endure. As we come to the end of our journey through pre-Islamic Arabia, it is impossible not to feel the weight of history and the depth of the human experience that existed before the arrival of the final messenger. The deserts, the markets, the tribes, and the scattered seekers of truth, all of it formed a world brimming with contrasts. Strength and weakness, honor and cruelty, hope and despair, they existed side by side, creating a society both vibrant and broken. Yet within this darkness, seeds of light were quietly planted, waiting for the moment when guidance would finally arrive. The story of Arabia before Islam teaches us that the human heart can endure hardship and yet remain open to truth. It reminds us that courage, integrity, and faith are timeless qualities that can flourish even in the harshest environments. Figures like Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail, who rejected the idols of their time, exemplify the resilience of the human spirit and the power of personal conviction. They show us that even when society seems wholly consumed by ignorance or moral decline, there are always those who prepare the way for transformation. Their example is not merely historical, it is a lesson for every one of us. We are reminded that our choices, our devotion to truth, and our willingness to stand for what is right can create ripples that extend far beyond our own lifetimes. As we leave behind the deserts and tribes of pre-Islamic Arabia, we must reflect on the central lesson of this era. Preparation matters. The moral, social, and spiritual turbulence of the time was not random. It was the stage upon which divine guidance would appear. Every injustice, every struggle, every spark of righteousness was a step toward the moment when the world would finally receive the light it had long awaited. History shows us that darkness is never absolute. It is always temporary, waiting for the arrival of clarity, mercy, and truth. And now, as we stand at the threshold of that monumental change, the world is about to witness the birth of a child whose life would alter the course of history forever. The same deserts that echoed with tribal disputes and cries of despair will soon hear the first whispers of hope. The marketplaces that buzzed with trade and poetry will witness the early signs of a message that unites hearts and nations. The scattered seekers of truth, like Zayd ibn Amr, will finally find the answer they had longed for, the revelation of a universal guidance meant for all humanity. In the next episode, we journey into this pivotal moment, the birth of Prophet Muhammad. We will explore the signs surrounding his arrival, the miraculous events foretold before his birth, and the social and spiritual conditions that made his coming not only inevitable but essential. We will witness how a single life, born into a world steeped in ignorance, would become the catalyst for justice, mercy, and enlightenment across the Arabian Peninsula and eventually the world. From the reactions of his family and the subtle prophecies whispered among the people, to the early lessons that shaped his character, we will uncover the story of a life destined to illuminate hearts and guide nations. Prepare to witness the dawn of a new era, where light begins to pierce the darkness and humanity stands on the brink of transformation. The stage is set, the world is waiting, and the story is about to unfold.